I'm Stephen Brown, and welcome to Rants and Raves video edition. And this episode is the third in a series called Ruling Class Crisis. This is, yes, Virginia, they really do hate America. Now, to recap, what I said earlier was, in the first edition, was there is a ruling class because there is always a ruling class. Ruling classes historically specialize in arms, production, land originally, and knowledge. That what we see around us, what explains a lot about our society, our civilization, that doesn't appear to make sense ordinarily, makes sense if we realize that what we're having is what I call a ruling class crisis, which means a widespread realization that we have a ruling class that is not fit to rule. Now, in the second episode, I made the distinction that yes, when we think of the ruling class, we mean the 1%, whatever, the people of great wealth and power who make policy, who tend to run things. An organization called Represent Us, capital US, points out that it's actually not the 1%, it's more like the 10%. They cite an old study that showed that the popularity of a measure, of a bill, say, or a policy passing in Congress is entirely unrelated to the likelihood of it passing. It said the likelihood of it passing, however, corresponds very strongly to how popular it is among the top 10% of income earners. However, I pointed out also in episode 2 that the ruling class can properly be considered not just the wealthy and powerful, but quite a number of people, especially young people, who are neither wealthy nor powerful, nor really likely to become wealthy. They are the equivalent of what in old Poland was the example I used, were called the petty nobility. Is they had some of the signs of the privileges and perks of a nobility, but in fact they're never going to be as rich as pick your example. And of course, this nor do they have places assigned to them in a hierarchy of rule, which bothers the hell out of them, because what's the point about being a member of a ruling class if you can't rule, if you can't tell other people what to do, or if you don't have special perks like that, laws that only you have to obey. Now, the word that describes a law that is just for you, of course, is privilege, from the Latin privilege, private law. It means one law for them, another law for us. I pointed out that a great deal of what appears like hypocrisy in these types is in fact not hypocrisy. It's a genuine indignation that they have to follow the same laws and standards as other people, as us peasants do. Now, of course, by this time it's plain that I'm talking mostly about the political left and the little darlings on campus who do so love to show their power over you by making you use some ridiculous pronoun they've invented, je, je, or embracing ideas of breathtaking absurdity or something. I say this is not sheer nuttiness on their part. This is a desire to make you do their will. I bet that's the point of being a member of a ruling class. Now, this episode, Ruling Class Crisis 3, yes, Virginia, they really do hate America. What I'm going to point out, what I pointed out previously, was that a ruling class can be stable if they do their own fighting, and if they love their country, or at the very least, they see their self-interest bound up with their country. My thesis here is that no, they don't, and this is, by the way, a shortened version of a longer speech I gave a few years ago at Liberty on the Rocks in Colorado, and it is available on YouTube. Stephen Brown, Stephen with a PH, Brown with an E, The Progressive Mind, and other essays. You can look up the whole thing. Now, I wanted to repackage it in a somewhat shorter form there to fit into this series of presentations, Ruling Class Crisis. So what am I claiming here? Well, nothing that hasn't been said before. Nowhere at present is there such a measureless loathing of their country by educated people as in America, Eric Hoffer said, and Eric Hoffer died in the late 60s. This has been showing for some time. Now, when I say that they hate America, not only that they hate America, but this deep hatred of America does not come from the poor and dispossessed. It comes from the most affluent and educated people in our society. And by the way, I believe this is a phenomenon that spreads across Western civilization. And it also explains a great deal of the hatred of America in Europe and places allegedly close to us there, but which I will get into in a minute. But okay, the people that hate our civilization, Western civilization, and America in particular, are, as I said, not the poor and dispossessed, certainly not recent immigrants. They are, in fact, among the most educated and affluent people in our society. Precisely the people who have benefited from our civilization the most. Now, this sounds seriously insane. Why would that be? Do they not know if this civilization collapsed, if this civilization did not exist, they'd be peasants? Or even if they were members of the ruling class, they'd be members of a ruling class without the benefits of our civilization, such as an example I like to use is Queen Anne of England. I am richer than Queen Anne of England. I have 2 children who are healthy and likely to survive into adulthood. Queen Anne had 15 children, none of whom survived into adulthood. That's one of the obvious benefits of our civilization. Our children don't die like they used to. Well, extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. And when you're talking about motive, proof is always in question, since I have pointed out many times in arguments about motive, which is very often what you find on the political left. Well, you just believe that because you're a rat-fink capitalist. Is if you argue motive, motive is something that resides in our heads. It is also what we are most likely to lie about, even to ourselves. So if I want to make a claim about motive, I have to appeal to human nature, to great minds of the past who have been made penetrating insights about human nature, and ruthless honesty and introspection. One has to be able to say, oh, that's what those rat-finks believe because they're awful people. Is if you can look at yourself and say, I think that's what they believe because I can kind of see that. I can see myself doing the same thing. At any rate, I'd like to start off with a quote by T.S. Eliot about this. Half the harm that is done in this world is due to people who want to feel important. They don't mean to do harm, but the harm does not interest them, or they do not see it or justify it because they are absorbed in the endless struggle to think well of themselves. Okay, that's a very succinct way of putting what another great thinker before him by the name of Abraham Lincoln saw this, and he saw this. It's actually one of his more famous speeches. In fact, I just finished a course from The Great Courses on Lincoln's oratory, and the address to the Young Men's Lyceum in Springfield was made in 1838, when Lincoln's political career was just getting off the ground. When I read it, I was in Warsaw and I had a book of Lincoln's, and this thing hit me right between the eyes. So I'm going to forgive me. I'm going to read something rather at length here. So this is from Abraham Lincoln's speech to the Young Men's Lyceum in Springfield, 1838. Good morning. That our government should have been maintained in its original form from its establishment until now is not much to be wondered at. It had many props to support it through that period, which are now decayed, crumbled away. Through that period it was felt by all to be an undecided experiment. Now it is understood to be a successful one. Then all that sought celebrity and fame and distinction expected to find them in the success of that experiment. Their all was staked upon it. Their destiny was inseparably linked with it. Their ambition aspired to display before an admiring world a practical demonstration of the truth of a proposition which had hitherto been considered at best no better than problematical, namely, the capability of a people to govern themselves. If they succeeded, they were to be immortalized, their names were to be transferred to counties and cities and rivers and mountains, and to be revered and sung and toasted through all time. If they failed, they were to be called knaves and fools and fanatics for a fleeting hour, then to sink and be forgotten. They succeeded. The experiment is successful, and thousands have won their deathless names in making it so. But the game is caught, and I believe it is true that with the catching ends the pleasure of the chase. The field of glory is harvested, and the crop is already appropriated. But new reapers will arise, and they too will seek a field. It is to deny what the history of the world tells us is true, to suppose that men of ambition and talents will not continue to spring up amongst us. And when they do, they will as naturally seek the gratification of their ruling passion as others have done before them. The question then is, can that gratification be found in supporting and maintaining an edifice that has been erected by others? Most certainly it cannot. Many great and good men, sufficiently qualified for any task they should undertake, may ever be found, whose ambition would aspire beyond nothing to a seat in Congress, a gubernatorial, or a presidential chair. But such belong not to the family of the lion or the tribe of the eagle. What? Think you these places would satisfy an Alexander, or a Caesar, or a Napoleon? Never! Towering genius disdains a beaten path. It seeks regions hitherto unexplored. It seeks no distinction in adding story to story upon the monuments of fame erected to the memories of others. It denies that it is glory enough to serve under any chief. It scorns to tread in the footsteps of any predecessor, however illustrious. It thirsts and burns for distinction, and if possible, it will have it, whether at the expense of emancipating slaves or enslaving free men. That very famous phrase has been used more than once. Whether it be at the expense of emancipating slaves or enslaving free men. Eric Hoffer, whom I quoted at first, noted that there is a similarity among what I call cause junkies, people whose life is tied up in a cause. I have also pointed out elsewhere that a political party will tend to be dominated by its most extreme elements. And why is that? Cause junkies. These are the people that live for the cause, for nothing else. The rest of us have lives. We got things that matter to us. Politics, for a great many of us, is an unwanted distraction from dealing with the problems in our lives and living our lives the way we want to live, passing something on to our children, building an estate, etc. So, as I've said, Lincoln pointed this out, and when I read it, it hit me, bam, right between the eyes. Why do people hate America in particular and Western civilization in general? Why are these the most affluent and educated classes in our society? And even the people who are graduating from college with useless majors and mountains of debt are still affluent by the standards of history and the standards of the rest of the world. And yet, here they say that America is totally corrupt, was fatally flawed in its beginnings, and is uniquely sinful among nations. Now, the sins of America are well known. I don't have to go over them. And yes, they're quite shocking in many cases. Yes, we had slavery for the first 84 years of our existence as a nation. Yes, there's an awful lot of Indians who wish we had never come here these days, although I wonder how they feel about that if they have to use an emergency room. But, excuse me, an examination of history shows that in fact America is no worse than any of the great civilizations of history, and apparently an awful lot better. I say, I mentioned that emergency room thing. I mentioned Queen Anne. I might mention that when I was a boy in London, I think I must have been about 5 years old, measles damn near killed me, like it did kill huge numbers of indigenous populations in different places and such. I don't know if it was medicine that saved me at that time, but certainly having a warm house and clean potable water had something to do with the fact that I survived it. The products of our civilization. So, as Lincoln said, again, why do people hate this wonderful civilization of ours in which we have progressed so far? If I mentioned slavery, we were the civilization that invented the idea that slavery was wrong, or rather inherited it from a few Greeks who tentatively mentioned the idea back 2,500 years ago. Hey, maybe it'd be a good idea if we didn't do this to people. Yeah, maybe we could make use of their energies and their minds in other ways that might be more productive than saying, do it or I'll kill you. So we have this thing, this edifice around us, this amazing civilization built by giants and such, and many of us feel, I think quite properly, we are not lesser men than they. We simply, our DNA does not decay. Degeneration of hereditary degeneration is a myth. I'm sorry, it doesn't, it doesn't happen that way. We are not lesser men than they. I think they see quite properly that they have not had a field to operate on equivalent to what they had. The moment of history hasn't arrived. So they wish to create it. In order for them to scale those heights, to become men like they were, like the founders of our civilization, our country, our civilization in general were, our civilization has to fall. As Lincoln pointed out, once those places are occupied, and I'm going to read you something by Francis Bacon here that explains this a little further. You see, I'm going further back into the past. How it goes, remember what I said about consulting historical people who've had great insight into human nature. Now keep in mind what Lincoln said about the family of the lion and the tribe of the eagle. And this is what Francis Bacon said. This is a very short essay. Bacon died in 1626 after a distinguished career in the service of Queen Elizabeth and then I think James. And in fact he lived to see colonies planted in the New World. Now, this is called On Honor. The true marshalling of the degrees of sovereign honor are these. In the first place are conditores imperiorum, founders of states and commonwealths, such as were Romulus, Cyrus, Caesar, Ottoman, Ishmael. In the second place are legislatores, lawgivers, which are also called second founders or perpetui principes, because they govern by the ordinances after they are gone, such as were Lycurgus, Solon, Justinian, Edgar, Alphonsus of Castile the Wise, that made the Siete Partidas. In the third place are liberatores or salvatores, such as compound the long miseries of civil wars or deliver their countries from servitude of strangers or tyrants, such as Augustus Caesar, Vespasianus, Aurelianus, Theodoricus, King Henry VII of England, King Henry IV of France. In the fourth place are propagatores or propugnatores imperii, such as in honorable wars enlarge their territories or make noble defense against invaders. And in the last place are the patres patriae, which reign justly and make the times good wherein they live, both of which last kinds need no example there in such number. Note that last caveat. The rulers who merely make good the times in which they live are so numerous they are rather insignificant to history. These are the people that Lincoln was talking about when he asked, said, would many great and good men, sufficiently qualified, should they undertake, may ever be found whose ambition would aspire to nothing beyond a seat of Congress, a gubernatorial or a presidential chair, etc. Notice something about elections recently. Elections for some time. Nobody ever goes on TV and says, like, listen, if you elect me, I promise I will be a good steward of the public funds. I'll maintain the infrastructure. There's a couple of projects which I think we need to undertake. Here are my qualifications, and if an emergency comes along, I think I can handle it. And this is why. Like, no, it's all about change. We've got to change. We've got to we've got to remake our whole society. Well, do you think that's just rhetoric? Or do they really want to either destroy our civilization? They would not put it that way, no. Or change it in such a way, make fundamental changes to which their names will be attached forever, which essentially mean the same thing. Essentially mean that yes, what you have has been destroyed and replaced with something new. Because, as Lincoln pointed out, and Bacon, the true marshalling of the degrees in the first place are the founders of states and commonwealths. In the second place are the legislators, the lawgivers, the people who make fundamental changes in the law. These are at the top of the notion of Bacon's notion of sovereign honor there. And as Lincoln pointed out, once those places are occupied in the history of a nation, they're at the top forever until that nation falls or undergoes such upheaval that it has to be essentially refounded. Remember, such as who are also called second founders or perpetuae principes. So this is what I believe we are seeing today. This is that we have a great many people now who see the heights of honor there. They see the history of their country, their nation, and they see they cannot get all the way to the top. Nobody is ever going to be George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, or James Madison again unless the nation falls and is refounded or something replaces it. I believe in Europe, the way this shows is, and then I believe, as I said, this explains an awful lot of anti-Americanism among our allies. Notice the people who loathe America the most are the Western Europeans. Where is America most popular? Eastern Europe. Remember, I lived there for quite some time. I speak some of the language. The Eastern Europe, of course, which has emerged from a period of occupation by a tyrannical empire. They wish to be allied with the West. They wish to be allied with America. They don't trust the West Europeans either, by the way, because what's the alternative? The alternative is not national greatness for them. It's national destruction. And believe me, there are peoples in small countries in Eastern Europe who are acutely aware that a hiccup of history could wipe their nation out forever. Have you ever heard of the Lusitanians, for example? Or did you know that the original Prussians were a Slavic tribe who were exterminated by the Teutonic Knights, who then resettled their lands and took their name? Now, why, again, this leaves the one question, why does this occur among the most affluent and educated people in our country? Why does it occur? Why does this odd phenomenon occur in a rich and successful civilization? Which, I mean, if this civilization fell, or if we knocked the props out from under our constitutional order that preserve our liberty, we could become a pretty dismal country, or we could break apart. We could be destroyed as a country. Why? For God's sake, why? And are we seeing more of these? I believe we are seeing more of this kind of. So to explain this, I would like you to introduce you to yet a third thinker. This one, however, is modern. He died within my lifetime. Abraham Maslow. That would be Maswolf in Polish, by the way. It means butter. But Abe Maslow, who came along at a time when psychology was, when things like child rearing was divided between permissive and behaviorist and things like that. And Maslow came along like a voice of sanity. Now, one of the most useful things he left is the notion of the hierarchy of needs. And I'm going to show you something here. And I understand psychologists tell me that there is something, there are problems with the model or something like that. I think it's one of those startlingly commonsensical things, that, like the thing that caused Julian Huxley to, after he read Origin of Species by Darwin, to exclaim, "How very stupid not to have thought of that." But what Maslow pointed out was, of course, human needs come in hierarchies. As a big deal, everything comes in hierarchies. Here, I'll show you. Yes, do we have that? Oh, good God. Okay, let's see here. Oh, hey. Well, it appears we don't. So I'm going to show it to you this way. I'm sorry. Okay. This is the hierarchy of needs. Now, oh, hey, it looks better this way. Down at the bottom are physiological needs: food, water, shelter, sleep. Okay, a little bit higher. Once those needs are satisfied, other needs come into play, because human needs can never be completely satisfied. Next, safety and security needs: health, family, social stability. Okay. Once those are satisfied, well, love and belonging needs. Yeah, we want friends, we want family, we want sex, we want, and for some of us, sex with somebody we love or at least like. Alright, so once those are satisfied, then higher needs. And notice, the higher you get, the further away from the physiological needs you get, the more abstract, the more internal these get. Esteem, confidence, achievement. Okay, well, now, now I got a house, I got a car, I got a nice job, kids are healthy. Now, I'd really like to think well of myself. Now, this is where we start getting into differences among people and among cultures, by the way. How we derive those things. There are healthy ways to derive that esteem, which is, I'm good at something. I think I'm a good dad. I've got friends whom I admire, who admire me. And then there are some not so healthy ways. Up here, and then above this, it blends into self-actualization, creativity, morality, spontaneity, self-fulfillment. I want to do something. And now this is where things get dicey. Sorry I wasn't able to bring that up on the screen in the more normal way. I'll look into that. This is where things get dicey. Once all of your needs, your physiological needs and your security needs are satisfied, these things kick into play. Are you beginning to get where I'm going to, where I'm coming from here? When I said the people who hate this civilization, who hate their country, who hate their civilization, and by the way, I'm not saying anything they won't tell you. It said, why do they hate America? Oh, you'll hear, we don't hate America. Yeah, actually you will. You will hear, yes, you will hear them accuse America of being all kinds of things, unless they're running for office. Because most people, in fact, still like this country. They still like the country they're born in. Now, these people, and I've called them, I generally call them progressives because I don't like calling them liberals. Liberal used to mean something which I thought was the noblest political philosophy the human race ever came up with. It doesn't mean that anymore, but it still hurts to use it in a pejorative way, so I tend to call them left progressives. And that's pretty much what they call themselves, too. Liberal is coming out of fashion, I believe. As I said, this is a philosophy of power. This is the notion that power can be benign. They have somehow missed on the American thing that power is freaking dangerous. That whenever we give it to somebody, we ought to watch them like hawks and be always suspicious of it. Like that. Yes, it may be necessary to give people a certain limited, a measured amount of power. They don't want that. They want power. And this goes from people who, the people who want to, I think, we got to get rid of that Second Amendment because I have some ideas of how we should modify the First. It comes from these people, these little darlings on campus, who will demand the resignation of a professor for refusing to call you "je" or whatever the hell they thought up this week. The specific issues change. The goal is power. And as I said, the goal is power to remake or destroy our civilization. Remake, they might agree with. Destroy, I don't know. Some actually might. Some think that there's a certain nihilism there, that our civilization is so corrupt it has to fall. But this is why. These are people, as I said, the most affluent and educated people. Their physiological needs have been met. Their security needs have been met. They are in no danger of starving. Oh, they might tell you about the terrible struggles of their childhood or whatever like that, which amount to, notice this, which amounts to, well, somebody hurt my feelings. Listen to their tale of how they were bullied on the playground and they heard this or whatever like this. Now, it seems terribly trivial, but it would be wrong to dismiss this. This is the kind of pain people feel who have had all their base needs, the needs in the bottom half of Maslow's pyramid, have had them met. And what is kicking in now are the needs for self-esteem and self-actualization. And for some people, some people can be creative, but some people wish to rule. And one of the pathological ways this manifests itself is making others do their will. And we have a civilization, we have a constitutional order which is specifically designed to hold this kind of people in check. Because men like Lincoln knew that this is what was going to happen. Men like Jefferson and Madison knew that there are always people like this. The family of the lion, the tribe of the eagle, who are going to want to do this kind of thing. And the Constitution, remember Barack Obama's famous words about the Constitution is a charter of negative liberties. And when he slipped once and said, it doesn't allow me to do some of the things I'd like to do, whatever, I don't remember the exact quote, but this is the way they feel about this. They see our civilization, the props of our Constitution, such to be restraints on them that they fiercely resent. I say, and this is why. They are the affluent people, but these are where their needs, the needs they most deeply feel, the need to feel superior to other people, the need to rule. Now, before I knock off, I would like to say there is often an explanation given which is called liberal guilt. Which is they see that not everybody shares their affluence and they feel terrible about it, and this is what leads them into this notion of we're a terrible civilization because we have not given everybody my standard of living. I find this unconvincing. Most of all because the impression I get from them is not guilt, but smug. A just fingernails on the blackboard, irritating, holier-than-thou smug. They very plainly feel themselves to be our moral superiors. And if we, mostly we laugh at them, sometimes we're terribly irritated by them, but Yeah, but they're making it impossible for us to ignore them. So I would say thank you very much. I hope I've kept this down to a reasonable amount of time. And I would merely like to say that if you are interested in what I have to say, I have a series of collected newspaper columns in the View from Flyover Country that is available on Amazon Kindle. I'm Stephen Brown. This is Rants and Raves Ruling Class Crisis Part 3, and I will try to get you to Part 4 as soon as I possibly can. Good night.